Now, meanwhile, Democrats are also up in arms, screaming from the mountaintops that the new acting interim Attorney General Matthew Whitaker has to go. But here's the thing. He hasn't done anything wrong yet, but Democrats won't even give him a chance. Maryland's Attorney General is challenging Whitaker in a lawsuit, arguing Rod Rosenstein should instead lead the department. Democrats, like Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, also calling for him to step down to protect the Mueller probe. Chuckles?
If Whitaker does not recuse himself, we Democrats are going to attempt to add legislation to the must-pass spending bill in the lame duck session that will prevent Acting Attorney General Whitaker from interfering with the Mueller investigation in any way.
In any way. We're just going to staple it right on there. Everything Schumer just said is pure theater, because Whitaker is reportedly consulting with Justice Department ethics officials about possibly recusing himself from the Russia investigation. The White House argues his past comments about Mueller were made as a private citizen and shouldn't hold water now that he's acting AG. Should Whitaker risk the president's wrath and recuse, or stand up to the Democrats still crying collusion? Joining me now, senior editor at The Federalist and a Fox News contributor, it is Mollie Hemingway.
Great to be here with you.
So, Mollie, let's talk recusal a little bit, because Democrats are citing these conflicts of interest not only in some statements that Whitaker's made in the past and in some things he's written, but also his association with a Trump campaign official, Sam Clovis, which seems to be a little bit of a loose association. So if they're so worried about conflicts of interest, how can they possibly say that Rod Rosenstein is the right man to be heading the Justice Department?
Right. If they really were worried about conflicts of interest, they would have very serious concerns with Rod Rosenstein. He's the guy who wrote the memo about firing James Comey. And then when Trump did fire James Comey, he immediately set up a special counsel in response to that. He also signed one of the warrants that contained false and misleading information to spy on an affiliate of the Trump campaign. And he has obstructed Congress as they're investigating what his department is doing. So if you want to talk conflicts of interest, Rod Rosenstein has them in spades, whereas Whitaker actually has no ties to the Mueller probe. And in fact, I think it's been, people say he spoke against the Mueller probe, sort of, but he also kind of spoke in favor of it. He was saying that it isn't some unrestricted investigation and that it does have constraints on it. And so I think people are kind of misinterpreting what he said to begin with. So it's more just, I think what people are saying is they don't want Donald Trump to have anybody running that agency who has any control over that agency.
I mean, Eric Holder and President Obama were very close.
They're best buddies, and Eric Holder was quite the partisan, but that's okay, actually. I mean, you want to have people, when you elect people president, what you're asking them to do is put people in charge of the departments. In our country, we don't believe that our agencies should be independent and not beholden to any accountability. That goes triple for any large law enforcement agency.
No, I understand. And Adam Schiff, of course, is calling for Whitaker to step down. And, my general rule of thumb is, if Adam Schiff wants it, I do not.
No, but it is funny. Adam Schiff is now really involved in congressional oversight, and he says he's going to really take Whitaker to task. Now, 3 weeks ago, holding people accountable in the Justice Department meant that you were going after rule of law and that you were a threat to the Republic. And now that he's in power, he's saying he's going to do exactly the kind of oversight that Devin Nunes was doing when he was heading up the same committee. But congressional oversight, again, is a good thing. That's the only group out there that should be doing that should be holding these people accountable. They are charged with doing that. That is their duty, and they should be allowed to do it. It's also important that people who are digging into problems at DOJ that we already know about get to do their investigations as well.
Well, it's really interesting to see what happens here. I think, and this is just my personal opinion, that wait for Whitaker to do something wrong before you talk about obstructing him or removing him or insisting on his recusal. And one of the other points they bring up is that his appointment is unconstitutional, and that is a very serious claim. Where do you fall on that?
I think, so long as it's temporary, and it is a temporary appointment, as far as we know now, I think that Donald Trump has a very strong case for putting this person in. So it's more important that people should focus on who the permanent replacement is, because he only gets 280 days with a temporary.
Who do you think the permanent? Do you think Whitaker will be made permanent, and could he withstand the confirmation process, or is it one of these other people that we've been hearing about, everyone from Rudy Giuliani to Chris Christie?
I mean, I'm not sure. I think Whitaker is fully qualified. He's someone who was appointed by President George W. Bush to be a USA. He's served as chief of staff for two attorneys general. There are plenty of people who would be good. What's really important is to have someone who isn't recused, who isn't unable to keep his agency in check. That was a disaster to have that for the last 2 years. There's so many things that are required to make sure this department can be viewed by the American people as trustworthy.
Do you think the Mueller probe could go on in another 280 days?
I mean, maybe they'll finally find that Russia collusion that they're really looking for. I mean, I don't know. It probably shouldn't have been going on this long.
They're in the trunk with the Bill Nelson votes.
And they're going to find it. I really believe it. I have full confidence.
All right, Mollie Hemingway, thank you so much.
Thank you.